a big thank you to our 5 panellists, who I will introduce as we go through. They've been given 3 minutes each to introduce their thoughts in response to a few introductory questions. So first of all, I hope we're now going to meet David Tittle, who is the Chief Executive of the Heritage Trust Network, a leading sector voice and one of our member organisations. David has spent over 20 years leading teams and organisations dedicated to improving the quality of places, spaces and buildings, and has participated in 3 heritage trusts in Coventry and the Black Country as a trustee, a volunteer and a manager. So David, heritage bodies and the many people listening to this debate today have been struggling with the impacts of COVID on their businesses. How relevant is the levelling up agenda going to be to them just now as they begin to look forward? What contribution do you see heritage making?
Hello, Pam, and thanks for inviting me. I'm a bit wary of language like struggling, because meeting challenges is what we do as a sector, as anyone who's managed a restoration project will tell you. So yes, there have been enormous impacts in terms of closed facilities, lost income, furloughed staff, delayed projects. But I think what the crisis has shown more than anything was the resilience and creativity of the sector. The way people adapted to the crisis, learned quickly, embraced new ways of engaging with audiences, found other productive tasks while projects were delayed or facilities closed, kept their staff and volunteer groups involved even when they're unable to work, discovered how important their outdoor spaces were. I was so impressed with how our members rose to the challenge of the pandemic. And right now, what we pick up from our members, community heritage organisations like Valley Heritage that we just saw, is that they're not dwelling on the difficulties. They're looking forward and using what they've learned over the past couple of years to find new futures for their projects and the sites that they manage. So levelling up. As you said, Pam, we're simply using a new term for what might be called economic development, regional policy. And whatever we want to call it, it is certainly needed. And there can be many aspects to regeneration programmes, but one key one is the physical regeneration of places, of towns, cities, villages, neighbourhoods, because these are the spaces that local people share and are a source of pride and their understanding of their place and how it's doing. And the businesses and community facilities that operate from those centres are hugely important. So I think levelling up is a huge opportunity for community heritage organisations to play a central role in their places. And our members are certainly doing that, leading or playing a leading role in high street heritage action zones, towns fund schemes and other initiatives. And that's a mix of restoration and reuse of key buildings and spaces, as we just saw in backup, as well as wider grant-based schemes for restoring premises and streetscapes and activity programmes that animate buildings and spaces. It's a fact that we no longer go into town for the necessities of life. We go for the experience, to eat and drink, to visit cultural facilities, to hang out, to people watch, and for a particular specialist retail experience. The historic environment really delivers that authentic experience of place that people are looking for, and urban forms that work for conviviality and vibrancy, as well as premises that can spur creativity and collaboration. So I think there's an opportunity right now for heritage organisations to be really leading that regeneration of place.
Thank you, David. And you take me back to the title of a, I hope, rather important document we published in 2001 at English Heritage called Power of Place. I think that's exactly what you're talking about. Thank you. On then to Paul. Paul Clement is Chief Executive of both Ipswich Central and Locus Management. The first, the Business Improvement District, or BID for Ipswich, and the second, a company specialising in the management, marketing and shaping of places after his roles at Savills as Head of Place Shaping and as a former Director of British Bids. Paul, successful regeneration requires private and public bodies to support local economies in many ways. Are levelling up policies and funds a new element in that mix? What do you see as the key tools that will reduce the regional and intra-regional disparities in our towns, cities and countryside today? And where do heritage assets come in?
Well, good morning. And before I answer your question, I think it's important that I just give a bit of background to what is actually happening in town and city centres, what really is going on. And let's dispel the myth, shall we, that COVID has caused what is going on. My view very firmly is that it's accelerated something that was already in train. So I think fundamentally you can break what's happening down into two sectors. First, the product. The old economic models that underpinned the vibrancy, vitality and success of our high streets and town centres, because that's really what we're talking about, those models are completely broken. So the idea that a landlord can acquire a big box and rent it to a retailer for 25 uninterrupted years, those days have gone. And secondly, the retailer, who we might have thought of as the anchor for our town centre, Debenhams, Topshop and so on, those covenants have disappeared. Now, actually, I think on the product side, there's a good aspect of this, which is we are going to see town and city centres that are less homogenised and more differentiated. So I think there's a positive there. The second area where I think things have changed sits around the consumer, you, me and everybody else in this session this morning. As David said, we don't need to go to our town centres anymore. We can frankly buy anything sitting on our sofa and using a mobile phone. Therefore, the need to be in a place has to be changed to the desire and the want to be in that place. So yes, I think levelling up is important, but actually my view, Pam, is that it is simply another name for economic development, but in a totally different landscape where we do have to recognise there are disparities between north and south, between in-town centres and out-of-town centres. But there are two really important aspects, I think, where it focuses the need for the future. And the first I picked out from the word chart you had at the start. There were three words or three phrases on there which I think are crucial to levelling up our places. The first is to not think of it building by building or street by street, but to think of a place-shaped vision. The second is that you have to have a leadership network. Somebody or some group somewhere has to say, this is what we are going to do. And the third, and I think this is where levelling up really does come in, is it is about bottom up. It's about collaboration, and it's about thinking of our places and our buildings differently, as flexible and differentiated, and no longer necessarily just being let and rented to Topshop. And in terms of heritage assets, part of that want to be there is a want to discover the history of the place, why the place was there in the first place, where are those assets that are different from anywhere else. So I do think it's important. I think it's just another name for economic development, but fundamentally we have to think of economic development differently than we probably ever have before.
Thank you, Paul, and that links nicely with David's point about the experience is what's going to matter in the future, and the discovery of the places we know, as many people I think have found through the last 2 years, as having so much more richness underneath and there already than we maybe thought. Let's move on then to the impact on communities. Dr. Nicola Stacey is Director of the Heritage of London Trust, with 25 years experience in the heritage sector at the Museum of London and at English Heritage. Last year, she launched the Proud Places programme, inspiring children across London to engage with heritage projects and hidden stories in their communities. And we'll see a brief look at one of them a little bit later on. Nicola, what value do you believe heritage-led regeneration can make to a community? And how does it or could it contribute to that other major focus today for us all, sustainability of both our communities and our environment?
Pam, thank you so much for inviting me today. Yes, everyone in the heritage sector is very aware of the positive impact that heritage has on well-being, and we talk a lot about that, and we promote it as one of the sort of key factors in investing in heritage. And 100%, I would agree with that. Of course, it's a critical element of that value. And one of the specific elements I would bring out would be that restoring historic sites encourages people to believe that the places they live more generally are worth valuing. So if you restore a historic site, people believe that there is investment in the site around them and in the place that they're living. Conversely, there's a very interesting scenario which I think is really critical and doesn't get discussed very often, which is one of the indices of levelling up is the level of crime and antisocial behaviour. And quite a lot of research going into the causes of that, especially amongst young people, is that young people vandalise and sort of vandalise historic sites and behave antisocially, really because they believe that the adults who should be responsible for the historic sites around them are not taking their responsibilities. They're not caring for those sites, and by extension, they themselves feel uncared for. So it's a kind of angry response to that lack of care, as opposed to just an idle pastime. And I think that's a really, really key element if one is to look at the value of restoring heritage and the trickle-down effect of restoring heritage on young people. However, I'd also say that restoring heritage itself is not enough. And I also noticed the word cloud at the beginning. And my view is that the key word in that word cloud is the word engagement. And I'm sorry that it wasn't right bang in the center of the image that you had. But I think restoring places is not enough. And I don't think it can help levelling up by itself. And I think you need engagement with heritage and the sites that one is restoring, and you need to reach out to communities, local communities living around them, but also specifically people and young people who are not a natural audience for those sites, who maybe come from more challenging backgrounds, and you engage those people with the heritage sites. And that's exactly what the Proud Places programme is doing. By its nature, heritage sites are sustainable. Effectively, you're repairing rather than replacing. So across the board, we can argue that heritage restoration is very sustainable. However, there are certain projects that are specifically sustainable, specifically contributing to a better, greener environment, such as restoring historic fountains, for example, which reduces single-use plastic. And those sites which are restored in public places have become huge beacons in their community. One incredibly important aspect of that environmental message is that it is very easily understood by young people. It's a way to engage with young people and wider communities than our normal heritage audiences. And that is absolutely key, because fundamentally young people are the guardians of heritage for the future. And I think if you're really trying to look at a sustainable heritage industry, you have to engage young people. You have to engage all young people. You have to engage young people who have not previously been engaged. And that is the best way that one can really hope for a sustainable and healthy and positive heritage environment.
Thank you very much indeed, Nicola. And I think those points about how our heritage agenda plays to sustainability, as well as levelling up, as well as community health and well-being, is really vital. And a very nice link into Dr. Tola Dabiri, who's a leading voice on diversity and inclusion within the sector, and how this relates to levelling up. She's founder and director of Brick by Brick Communities in Hertfordshire and Museum X, which is being developed as a museum to celebrate Pan-Africanism and Black Britain. Tola, as Nicola says, this agenda has to be driven bottom up as well as top down, engaging communities if it's to be successful. And we need some great examples of success as models. We're going to see one of those fountains a little bit later, but tell us about your work with the community interest company, Brick by Brick, which has been supported by the Heritage and Community Lottery Funds and by the Arts Council.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Good morning, Pam. And thank you also for this wonderful opportunity to talk about our work here in Hertfordshire. I was laughing slightly because of the wonderful examples, and I hope everybody thinks that we've done a good job, if not wonderful examples. The first thing I wanted to say, though, when I was thinking about a response to this question, is that we're a very new CIC. We formed in 2019. We actually were just beginning our first major project when the pandemic hit. And so we had to completely change how we were going to approach how we worked. We were very lucky in that we got funding from the emergency funds, from the Arts Council and from Heritage Lottery, or National Lottery Heritage Fund. And I do wonder, without access to those emergency funds, would we be where we are? Would we have been able to achieve what we've been able to achieve over the past 18 months? And I think that, if not, I'm not talking about money, but I'm talking about the way that funds are accessed by small community groups is key in the levelling up agenda. The emergency funding that was available gave us the opportunity to demonstrate our contribution, which we may not have had. So I do think that's something that really policymakers do need to keep in mind, is how do you give communities the opportunity to contribute to the levelling up agenda and the improvement of their environment. So to go back to Brick by Brick, as I say, we're a very small community interest company and we work across South Hertfordshire and Watford in particular. We've had two major projects which relate to heritage. The first was in the summer of 2020, and it was called Carnival in a Box. And this was funded by the Arts Council's emergency funding. And this was an incredibly democratic project because we crowdsourced videos from carnivalists who were unable to go on the road because of the pandemic, because as you know, in 2020 and 2021, all carnivals have been cancelled because of COVID-19. And so we crowdsourced from them examples of how they would like their work to be portrayed, and put that on a website for anyone to see and anyone to access. Carnival is a great example of intangible cultural heritage. It's extremely important to the places where carnivals take place, and it's extremely important to the masqueraders who go on the road. And so by actually being able to sort of like display that work, we actually gave people a chance to tell their own heritage stories. So we're really quite proud of that, and the way that communities can directly shape the story that they want to tell. The second project that we've done, heritage project that we've done, is called What for Black History. And we actually, that was during the pandemic, so it was actually quite difficult to get access to all of the materials, but we began by mapping examples of Black history in Watford, which actually were hidden. Although the museum does do a very good job in trying to uncover these stories, most of these stories remain hidden. So we focused on three elements in the town. We focused on Black service people in World War I and World War II, the football club, which has had some quite, in Watford, the football club is very central to the community. So Black football players and managers at the football club, and the theatre, because Watford has quite a vibrant theatrical life. It has 3 theatres, and the Palace Theatre has been in existence for well over 100 years. And during that time, many performers of colour have actually passed through and performed on that stage. So we focused on 3 areas. And again, this was a democratic exercise, although it was very hampered by our ability to engage with the community as researchers. But again, it was an opportunity for people within our community to tell their own stories. And levelling up has to be about asking the people who are being levelled what they feel is important, as opposed to being told what is important by the people who want to up them. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you. Not necessarily a phrase I shall use, but thank you, Tola. And your reference to shaping stories is so relevant to the points about the experience of a place, and is the experience of that community. We've talked a bit, or at least the word cloud has, about the importance of investment, and investment through so many different channels, as Tola has mentioned. Finally, then, we have Matthew McKeague, Chief Exec of the AHF, who was previously Director of Regeneration at the Church's Conservation Trust, where I was briefly an interim CEO a long time ago, and before that, one of Lambeth Council's regeneration team. He's also Chair and Trustee of Forest Recycling Project. Matthew, the AHF offers loans as well as grants, and so is well attuned to what makes for business success and good investment. Where do you see the opportunities for sticky investment in heritage that creates long-term value? And how should we in the heritage sector measure that value to demonstrate impact?
Thanks, Pam, and good to be here today. On the first thing, I guess, what creates sticky investment, and I'm at risk, I guess, when you go last in a panel, you end up repeating the great ideas that the other panelists have slightly. But one of the things that is definitely needed within this agenda is focusing just beyond investment in buildings. It's really important that we see this in the sector as being beyond just investment in buildings, which is an important part of it. But it's also about the local organisations that are key to delivery and sustaining that investment. And I think we should recognise that the agenda so far is too centralised. I think there's an over-centralised approach to the levelling up agenda at the moment, and it's got to be sort of rooted in the local economy. So Paul's kind of mentioned earlier of a place-based vision, I think is really important. And Valley Heritage, which is one of our heritage development trusts funded through our Transforming Places programme, you can see there the focus on the building, but also on local economic development. And in places like Baker, which suffer from kind of low land values, you don't get the private sector investment. What Valley Heritage are trying to do there is to invest in this building and to bring uses into the town centre that aren't there already, so housing and workspace, but for this to act as a catalyst really for wider investment, and to get that wider investment to stick. What the agenda can't be about really it solely is about heritage being just about new museums or new visitor attractions. I think that's a part of it for some projects and some places, and for that to kind of fit within their vision. But it's about kind of some of those wider uses that are central to the future of place. And some of what the Valley Heritage video showed there was about that kind of question of partnerships and non-heritage sort of partnerships with SMEs or local not-for-profits. In terms of evaluation, I think there were a number of evaluation frameworks out there for things like the Towns Fund, the Future High Streets Fund. You can see some of those on the web, and some of those have like the harder edged outputs that lots of these programmes, have had in the past: employment, floor space brought back into use, footfall, which is really going to be important to kind of town centres, measuring footfall. Those are maybe the easier ones, or in some ways to kind of demonstrate. I think civic pride will be harder. A more kind of survey-based sort of approach needed. Ultimately will be a bit more subjective about sort of how people feel that their place has changed. What we've kind of seen are some heritage organisations, one of our other heritage development trusts in Great Yarmouth Preservation Trust, who have been working on a street in Great Yarmouth town centre, King Street, since 2010 to really kind of turn that street around. And what they've done is really help to kind of get investment into that street, but also curate the businesses and the uses that are coming in. So they've done a lot of work with kind of the Portuguese community, and they've got various other kind of businesses coming in and taking over some of the shops on King Street. And one of the sort of, the killer stat, so to speak, there is that they've turned it around from kind of 70% vacant to pretty much 70% occupied. And I think it's those kinds of simple statistic, as well as the more complicated evaluation frameworks, that we need to be able to present to funders and to decision makers about the role that we can play in a sector in kind of delivering around levelling up.
Thank you very much, Matthew. And new uses also plays into the sustainability point that was being made by Nicola. I think for me, it's only 20 years and a bit since the heritage has really been involved in regeneration, and we've had funding programmes to make it happen. So I think there will be some lessons out of those 20 years about how we can really demonstrate the softer KPIs as well as the harder. And as we look at community wellbeing, health is going to be something that we're going to be measuring, and mental health is so stimulated by the sort of volunteering programs that so many of you in the audience will be running, engaging people with their community and enabling them to actually feel a part of creating the future.